You're not dressed like someone asking for $1 million loan, the receptionist muttered, pushing the clipboard across the counter without looking up. Not good morning, not Mr. Cole, just judgment, wrapped in fake professionalism and thinly veiled suspicion. Across the marble lobby, 3 white clients were greeted by name and handed bottles of water. Darius Cole, black in a hoodie and sneakers, was handed paperwork. Even though this was his own bank, they didn't know who he was. But they were about to find out. Because the man they just denied, he wasn't some walk-in with big dreams and bad credit. He was the largest private shareholder of Horizon the First. And the moment he walked out that door, a countdown began. Have you ever been judged by your appearance and been treated like you didn't belong? This isn't just about a bank. It's about bias, silence, and what happens when the person you underestimated owns the room. If you believe respect should come before prejudice, drop a respect first in the comments and hit subscribe now. Because today's story isn't just about being denied, it's about a lesson and a reckoning that shook an entire institution. Hi everyone, welcome to BW Stories. Let's get started. The receptionist's smile disappeared the moment he stepped through the glass doors. Darius Cole didn't miss it. He caught the flash of hesitation in her eyes, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her gaze skimmed down his hoodie over his dark jeans and paused just long enough on his worn sneakers to register judgment. Then she looked back at her monitor. It was a small gesture, but it was also the first crack in a wall he hadn't known still existed in his own bank. "Good morning," Darius said, voice even. "I have an appointment." The woman didn't look up, with whom a loan officer scheduled for 10 sharp. She finally lifted her eyes, slow and unimpressed. "Name Darius Cole," a flicker of confusion, then suspicion. She typed. Her fingers moved too quickly for someone searching the database. It wasn't about finding his name, but confirming what she thought she already knew. After a few seconds, she sighed and pushed a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out. Sit over there. Someone will be with you. No welcome to Horizon First. No eye contact. No Mr. Cole. Just a clipboard. And cold indifference." Darius took it, glanced briefly at the familiar Horizon First logo at the top of the form, and walked to the waiting area. It was all theater. He already knew. The system had his complete profile. He didn't need to fill anything out. But today wasn't about shortcuts. He sat legs crossed at the ankle, scanning the lobby through the corner of his eye. Polished marble floors, sunlight streamed through 2-story windows, motivational posters on the walls that read things like "Banking for all and everyone deserves a future." The irony was thick enough to choke on. 3 other customers were seated nearby, 2 men in suits, 1 woman in designer heels, all white. All offered water. All were personally greeted. And all had come in after him. He watched a branch manager in a blue blazer walk one of the men to a private office, smiling and chatting as if they were old friends. Darius's phone buzzed in his pocket. A reminder: meeting with zoning attorney at 11:30. "Don't be late." He silenced it. This loan, $1 million for a housing complex dedicated to military veterans, wasn't about expanding his already successful real estate portfolio. It wasn't even about the money. Darius could fund it from his holding company in 48 hours if he wanted to. But that wasn't the point. The point was, what happens when a black man dressed with no entourage, titles, or introductions walks into his bank and asks for help? Would he be seen, heard, helped, or would he be handled? A door creaked open. A blonde woman in her 30s stepped out. Her smile was the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Cole," she called. He rose and approached. She barely glanced at the clipboard. "I'm Haley. Let's go to my office." Her tone wasn't warm. It was curt, professional, but flat. She gestured at the chair across her desk inside her office, but didn't wait for him to sit before speaking. So she said, booting up her computer, "You're here about a loan application." "That's right," Darius replied, settling in. $1 million for a veteran housing project. Documentation has already been submitted. But I brought physical copies just in case." He handed over a leather folder, custom printed, tabbed indexed. Haley accepted it without looking inside. She scanned her monitor. What's the concern?" Darius asked. "Well," she said, voice suddenly pinched, "this is a sizable request, and I'm not seeing any collateral listed on the initial intake. There's a 40% down payment and title to 3 fully owned commercial properties in Houston." Haley blinked. "I see." Darius kept his tone neutral. "Is that not sufficient?" "No, it's just..." She leaned back in her chair, studying him now with open skepticism. "You don't look like someone who..." She caught herself. Too late. Darius tilted his head slightly. Owns that much commercial property? She finished quickly. The silence was immediate and heavy. Haley cleared her throat and looked back at her screen. Let me get Greg. He's the branch manager. He'll make the final decision. She stood before he could respond. Alone in the room, Darius exhaled slowly, fists clenching around the arms of the chair. So this is what it felt like, the second-guessing the dissection. He'd built 3 companies from the ground up, sat on the board of 2 hospitals, donated more than $20 million to public infrastructure initiatives across the South. But here in this building that bore his bank's name, he was being reduced to clothing and skin. He thought of his mother's son. When you walk in, they don't see your resume. They know what they expect to see. And what they expect ain't ever fair. The door opened. A middle-aged white man entered, clean-shaven cufflinks, faint whiff of expensive cologne. Mr. Cole, he said, extending a hand. Greg Thorne, let's talk. They sat. Greg flipped open the folder. You're applying for $1 million loan, he said. That's substantial. Darius nodded. Not for this branch, I'd think. Greg smiled politely. True, but our process is strict. Risk is always our first concern. Then let's talk about risk, Darius said, tapping the folder. You'll find audited statements for the past 5 years, tax returns, asset sheets, credit history, project plan, municipal permits, and projected ROI over 5 and 10 years. The data should speak for itself. Greg closed the folder. He hadn't looked past the first page. Mr. Cole, sometimes risk isn't about numbers. It's about instincts, and I'm going to be candid with you. He leaned forward slightly. This application feels off. Not fraudulent, just questionable. Darius's face didn't move because of the project. No, Greg said slowly, because of the applicant. Haley looked up sharply. Even she hadn't expected him to say that aloud. Darius sat back. I see Greg's side. We appreciate your interest, Mr. Cole. But based on what we've seen today, the loan is denied. He slid a printed letter across the desk. It was already signed. Darius didn't pick it up. He stood and smiled. I understand, he said quietly. Thank you for your time. Then he walked out past the receptionist, the marble lobby, and the motivational posters still clinging to their fake promises. But neither Greg nor Haley realized that their clock had just started ticking. 9 minutes, that's all it would take. 9 minutes before everything changed, Darius didn't storm out of Horizon First. He didn't need to. He walked with the same steady, quiet power he had built his life. On deliberate, composed, but every step charged with something electric. By the time he stepped onto the sidewalk, a silent storm had already begun to form in the building behind him. Back inside the branch, Greg Thorne stood at the window, arms crossed, watching Darius disappear into the crowd of downtown pedestrians. Haley leaned against her desk behind him, arms folded tightly. Her fingers twitched. She hadn't even opened the application folder. She didn't need to. Greg had spoken for both of them. His decision was final, but something didn't sit right. Did you see the documents he brought? She asked in a low voice. Greg didn't turn around. It doesn't matter. It's gut, Haley. You can't teach that. He doesn't fit. Haley hesitated. He had everything in order. Greg finally turned face hard. Did you see what he was wearing? He walked in here like he just came off the street. No assistant, no presentation, no professionalism. That's not how real CEOs act. Haley said nothing. Greg nodded at the door. We just saved the bank a mess. That guy was trouble. Trouble, the word echoed. A man with perfect credit, with a down payment, prepared with millions in assets. But Greg had decided in minutes that he was a liability. Back on the sidewalk, Darius stood beside a newsstand outside the bank entrance. He glanced at his watch. It had been exactly 4 minutes. He unlocked his phone. He didn't call his assistant. He didn't dial his attorney. He scrolled to a single name, Clara. Audit ops. Then he pressed call. Clara, his voice was flat. Darius, everything okay? I need a real-time audit of Horizon First. Downtown branch, pull all loan approvals and rejections over the past 120 days. Sort by applicant, demographics, credit rating, loan amount, and assigned officer. She didn't ask why. On it, you'll have a live feed in 3 minutes. Route it to my tablet. I'll be back inside by then. Darius hung up, slipped the phone into his pocket and turned. He was going back in, but not as a man seeking a loan. This time he was going as the man who owned ownership of Horizon First voting shares, whose initials were at the bottom of the shareholder bylaws. The man who wrote the bank's public charter about equality. Inside, Haley was at her desk, nervously tapping a pen. She kept glancing at the door. Something about how Darius had walked out silent. No protest had rattled her more than if he'd shouted. Greg didn't notice. He was too busy bragging to a regional sales rep who'd come in to pitch a new portfolio tool. Guys like that always come in here, Greg said. Talk big. They want $1 million check dressed like they just got off a city bus. No assets, no credibility. The rep chuckled awkwardly. Greg grinned and sipped his coffee, and then he choked. The front doors opened again, and in walked Darius Cole. This time he didn't stop at the front desk. He didn't ask for an appointment. He walked with the kind of calm that didn't ask for permission because it never needed to. Greg blinked. What the hell? Darius walked directly toward them. Greg stood confused, a smile already dying on his face. Mr. Cole. Darius held up a tablet. Live graphs flickered on the screen. Colored charts, timelines, percentages, Clara had delivered. Let me show you something, Darius said, his voice low, steady. Greg frowned. Sorry, what? These are loan approval patterns for this branch, Darius said, tapping the screen. The tablet rotated. On one chart, a cluster of approvals for white applicants with average credit scores. Next to it, a stack of rejections for Black and Latino applicants with higher credit scores and stronger financials. Over the last 4 months, Darius said you've approved 93% of white applicants seeking over $500,000 and just 8% of Black applicants in the same category with better numbers. Greg's face turned a shade paler. This branch, Darius continued, is the only one in Horizon First portfolio showing this pattern. Haley stared at the tablet, blood draining from her face. Greg tried to speak. Look, these numbers, they don't lie, Darius said, and neither do you. Greg flinched. Haley stood abruptly. Mr. Cole, save it, he said sharply. Let me make something very clear. He continued, looking at Greg. You didn't deny that application because of numbers or risk or policy. You denied it because when you saw me walk in without a three-piece suit and a title pinned to my chest, your mind made a decision. And now mine has too. Greg took a step back. I think we should speak privately. Darius ignored him. He turned to Haley. You followed his lead, he said, voice cool, but you knew better. Haley swallowed. Darius stepped back and lifted the tablet again. This audit report was sent to Sandra Lim. As of 3 minutes ago, Greg's mouth fell open. Regional Director Sandra Lim, he asked, voice breaking. Darius didn't answer. He turned to the lobby. Staff had stopped what they were doing. A few customers had frozen mid-transaction. Phones were out. Videos were rolling. Darius stepped toward the center of the branch, his voice rising just enough to carry, My name is Darius Cole, he said, steady and clear. I am the largest private shareholder of Horizon First Bank. And I walked in here this morning to ask for a Veterans Housing Project loan, a charitable initiative, fully funded, fully compliant, fully documented. He turned slowly, making eye contact with every employee now staring, and I was dismissed, insulted, judged. Not because of what I said, not because of what I brought, but because of how I looked. Silence. You could hear the soft hum of the building's air vents, and then the front door burst open. A woman in a gray suit strode in, heels-sharp ID badge swinging from her blazer. Sandra Lim. Greg looked like he'd seen a ghost. She scanned the room, eyes moving over the stunned staff, the wide-eyed customers, and finally landing on Darius. Then she turned to Greg. Mr. Thorne, she said crisply, you'll come with me. Now Greg opened his mouth to argue. Sandra didn't wait. She pointed to the nearest security guard. Escort him to the side office. Wait, Greg started, but the guard was already moving. Haley was frozen, her hand over her mouth. Darius looked at Sandra and gave a single nod. I'll wait, he said. She returned the nod and disappeared with Greg. Phones were still filming. But the real story, it hadn't even started yet. Darius didn't sit. He stood in the center of the Horizon First lobby where the marble floors had echoed with indifference just minutes earlier. Now they reflected every heavy silence, every glance darting nervously from desk to hallway, every pulse of a system about to crack. Across the branch, Haley still hadn't moved. A teller whispered to a colleague behind the counter. A mid-withdrawal customer stared at Darius as if watching a live broadcast of history being rewritten. Behind the frosted glass doors of the side office, Sandra Lim was grilling Greg Thorne, and the muffled intensity of her voice carried even through the walls. But Darius wasn't watching the door. He was watching his tablet. The audit feed from Clara was now updating in real time. Loan officer performance filters were active, and demographic, heat maps were sharpening by the second. It wasn't just Greg. The data had unearthed others. 4 other branches, 7 other officers. One had a 3% approval rate for black applicants, despite issuing over 40 high-value business loans in the last quarter. The rot wasn't isolated, it was spreading. Darius narrowed his eyes, thumb hovering over a contact labeled Executive Oversight. Encrypted. Before he pressed it, the hallway door opened again. Greg was no longer walking. He was being escorted, face flushed, jacket wrinkled from stress, lips tight with forced silence. Sandra walked a half step behind him, every inch the storm she'd always been in corporate boardrooms. When they re-entered the main floor, Greg glanced around, searching for allies. He found none. Staff were frozen. Customers were staring. Haley looked down. Effective immediately, Sandra announced, her voice ringing across the marble tiles. Greg Thorne is suspended pending full internal review. A whisper rippled through the staff. Greg turned to her, mouth open. You can't. She cut him off with a single finger raised. HR is waiting for you in the conference room upstairs. Your items will be boxed and delivered. You should not access bank systems or internal communications during the investigation. Greg turned to Darius, rage flickering behind the panic. You think this makes you a hero? Darius didn't blink. No, it makes me accountable. Something you've never had to be. Greg looked like he wanted to lunge, but Sandra nodded at the guards, and within seconds he was gone. The front door closed behind him like a vault ceiling shut. Darius turned to Sandra. Thank you. Sandra's expression was unreadable. Don't thank me yet. This is just the start, Darius nodded, glancing once more at his tablet. Then let's keep going. He tapped the encrypted contact. It rang once, twice, then connected Mr. Cole. The voice on the other end was sharp, clipped. Evelyn Darrow, chairwoman of Horizon First Board Compliance Subcommittee. Put me on secure channel, Darius said. There was a pause. Then channel secure. I'm invoking Section 4 of our oversight charter, he said. Pattern discrimination confirmed at multiple branches. Downtown location just caught live on video. I've got full audit trails and employee records being compiled. Evelyn was quiet. Then, do you want the board looped in? Not yet. I want real action, not apologies. I want every regional director briefed. Every performance incentive was frozen for officers with flag patterns. And I want HR to begin immediate review of the hiring funnel. That's a full-blown intervention, Evelyn said. It's overdue, Darius replied. She didn't argue. I'll escalate to the general counsel, she said. You'll have everything in 48 hours. I need it in 24, Darius snapped. We've already lost years. I'll make the call. He hung up. Sandra was watching him, brows raised. That call went above me, didn't it? Way above, Darius said. You're not the only one tired of covering for incompetence. Haley finally stepped forward. Her voice was thin, almost fragile. Mr. Cole. Darius turned. She didn't flinch, but her hands were clenched tightly by her sides. I should have said something, she admitted. When Greg dismissed your file, when he laughed, and I knew something was off. But I didn't want to get in the middle. Silence is a choice, Darius replied, not unkindly. One thing a lot of people think they can afford. I didn't realize it was you, she added quietly. That's the point, he said. You shouldn't have to know someone's name to treat them with respect. She looked away, eyes wet. I'll cooperate with the review, she said. Whatever you need, Darius nodded once. A regional assistant, breathless, walked in. At that moment, holding a printed memo. Miss Lim, there's a press request, Channel 9. They say the word is spreading. Sandra accepted the memo and turned to Darius. You want to issue a statement? He shook his head. Not yet. Let the facts pile up first. Let them stew in what they have ignored. He took one last look around the branch. Customers were still whispering. Staff were still stunned, but the spell had broken. The silence wasn't indifference anymore. It was reckoning. He strolled toward the door, past the desk where he'd been denied, past the chair he'd never been offered to sit in, past the eyes that had dismissed him only minutes ago. As he reached the exit, he paused, turned back and said loud enough for everyone to hear, next time someone walks in here dressed as I was asking what I asked, don't look at what they wear. Look at what they bring. Then he pushed open the glass doors and walked back into the sunlight. The first video went viral before the sun even set, posted by a college student waiting in line at Horizon First. It captured everything. The denial, the confrontation, the audit data, and finally Darius Cole's quiet declaration of ownership. It was raw, shaky, just over 3 minutes long, but within 2 hours it had more than 2 million views. The caption read, "They tried to deny a loan to a black man. Turns out he owns the bank." Watch Banking While Black. Darius Cole speaks. Horizon hypocrisy. The reaction was immediate. TikTok exploded with duets and stitches. One user held her phone to the camera, tears in her eyes. "I've been that person in the bank lobby. I just didn't have Darius's power." God bless this man on X formerly. Twitter trending topics emerged like wildfire. Darius Cole speaks. Horizon. Hypocrisy. Banking. While black, dozens of people came forward sharing eerily similar experiences. Denied loans despite perfect credit, dismissed at the tellum, asked to prove they owned their businesses. BuzzFeed, Vice, and NPR picked up the original video within hours. By morning, the New York Times headline read, "CEO discriminated against in his own bank." Darius Cole, founder of Horizon First, denied loan and undercover visit. Right below the headline were two images. On the left is a screenshot of Darius being handed the denial letter. On the right, the 15-foot portrait of him hangs in the Horizon First headquarters boardroom. CNN led with it that evening. Banking While Black: what happens when a CEO walks in without his title? Forbes followed suit, running a feature titled "Darius Cole and the Dangerous Myth of Post-Racial Banking." The stock price of Horizon First dipped 7% overnight. Public pressure mounted, civil rights leaders weighed in. The NAACP issued a statement. Horizon First must reckon not just with the embarrassment of what happened to Mr. Cole, but the systemic inequality that allowed it. Veterans organizations, many of whom had been set to benefit from the housing development loan, were outraged. This wasn't just an insult to a black businessman, one retired colonel said on MSNBC. It was a slap in the face to every vet he was trying to help. Two major Horizon First branches were met with peaceful protests in Houston and Atlanta. Placards read, "I'm not my credit score, unless I'm white. Horizon First diversity and brochures only." Darius walked in with numbers. They only saw skin. Inside the bank, branch managers scrambled, and internal communications revealed panic. Executives raced to prepare statements, but Darius stayed silent for now. It was Haley who broke first. She gave a quiet quote to a local journalist from the Sunville Gazette. "I didn't speak up. That's my failure, but Greg said out loud what too many only think." Her words only added fuel. The real explosion came that Friday night. Darius Cole on CBS Evening News. It was a special segment hosted by Norah O'Donnell. The backdrop is a dimly lit studio, and American flags are muted behind blue filters. Darius wore a navy suit, no tie, and a solemn expression. Norah leaned in gently. "Mr. Cole, what happened in that bank?" Darius paused, then said, "I walked in wearing jeans and a hoodie, no watch, no car key fobs dangling, no assistant beside me, and they looked right through me," he continued. Voice even but cutting. "I built Horizon First from nothing, brick by brick. When my mother was denied a loan in 1986 after baking pies for 20 years, I swore I'd build something different, something that would see us. That bank, with its slogans about equality, it saw me as a threat." Norah asked, "What was the hardest part of that moment?" Darius stared into the camera. The silence, that I wasn't even worth a question, that I handed them millions in documents and got a clipboard instead. He looked away just briefly. "It wasn't about me, not really. It was about what I represent, about every young black man who walks in clean, respectful, prepared, and gets treated like noise." The final question came like a blade. "What do you want now, Mr. Cole?" He didn't blink. "Accountability, not just for me, for everyone who's been ignored, dismissed, denied, then softer. This isn't just my story, it's America's. The question is, what are we going to do with it?" The segment ended with footage of the original video playing behind Norah's closing remarks. Darius Cole had just ignited a national reckoning. Across the country, customers began pulling funds from Horizon branches. Senators called for hearings. The FDIC made quiet inquiries. And inside the boardroom of Horizon First, chairs sat uncomfortably close to the fire. The man they had once dismissed in a hoodie was now speaking directly to the country's soul, and the country at last was listening. The boardroom on the 31st floor of Horizon First's headquarters had seen its share of tense meetings, but nothing like this. Every director was present, not a single empty seat, and no one dared to speak as Darius Cole stepped into the room. He didn't come in flanked by lawyers. He didn't need to. He came with a flash drive in his breast pocket, a folder under his arm, and the pressure of a nation watching through a million smartphone screens. The silence was suffocating. No handshakes, no small talk. Not today. Let's begin, Darius said, setting his folder down at the head of the table. He didn't sit. From the corner, Eleanor Dawes, the board's legal counsel, cleared her throat. Ms. Cole, before we begin. Darius raised a hand. We're past disclaimers, Eleanor. You'll want to take notes. She nodded, opened her laptop and began typing. Darius plugged the flash drive into the central screen. Up came the footage unedited from the Horizon First downtown branch. The receptionist's cold dismissal. Greg Thorne's arrogant posture, Haley's uneasy silence, and finally Darius's calm, searing public unmasking. The board watched in stunned silence. Faces flushed, fingers drummed nervously on the polished table. When the video ended, Darius leaned in. This is not a PR crisis, he said. This is a moral failure. He let the words hang in the air before continuing. What happened that morning was not an isolated event, and I will no longer allow my name, to stand for two different standards of service depending on the color of a customer's skin. He opened the folder and slid copies down the table. This is the first step, zero tolerance. The policy was 10 pages long, concise but unyielding. No bias, implicit or explicit, overt or systemic, will be tolerated within Horizon First. Any employee, regardless of rank, who engages in discriminatory behavior or allows it to persist without intervention will be terminated immediately. One director glanced nervously at another. The words were bold, unforgiving, and for the first time in Horizon's history, uncompromising. This isn't a proposal, Darius said. This is a directive, effective today. I expect a signed commitment from each of you by 5 p.m. It will be included in our public filing and embedded into every HR document. From now on, Eleanor looked up. You're codifying this into corporate governance, Darius nodded. It's already been reviewed by outside counsel. He turned to the screen again. Slide 2, a new mandate titled Internal Equity Audit Initiative. Every employee from front desk staff to regional managers will undergo immediate retraining, not another lifeless PowerPoint. This will be intensive, monitored, and overseen by third-party professionals in equity and inclusion. One executive leaned forward. That will take months. It'll take whatever time it takes, Darius snapped. But no one will stay in a customer-facing role without certification. And those who fail, they're gone, Darius said simply. Another director shifted uncomfortably. Isn't this a bit extreme? Darius's jaw flexed. Extreme, he repeated. You think this is extreme? He slammed a photo onto the table, a still frame from the viral video. It showed Greg mid-smirk as he slid the loan denial across the desk. You call this extreme? Try being the man on the other side of that smirk. The room fell silent. He switched to the third slide. Triage and Redress Committee. Phase 1 Loan Rejection Review. We're reopening every denial from the last 90 days. Over 300 files. Every branch, every officer, cross-checked with demographic data, financials, and rejection notes. What if there's resistance from the field teams? Someone asked quietly. Then the field teams are part of the problem, Darius said coldly. He paced now, the room hanging on his words. Customers whose loans were unjustly rejected will receive a formal apology. From me personally. Any application that meets our real criteria will be fast-tracked under improved terms, no exceptions, the CFO leaning forward. Won't that be a financial hit? Darius met his gaze. The bigger hit is what happens if we don't. Lost trust, lost community, lost integrity. He paused. And the hit I already took when I was humiliated by my staff for daring to walk into my bank without a nameplate on my chest. Nobody argued because there was nothing to argue. The truth was laid bare. And this time there was nowhere to hide from it. Darius returned to the head of the table. One more thing. He tapped the final slide, whistleblower protections and anonymous reporting expansion. Going forward, any employee who reports discriminatory behavior is protected. No exceptions, no retaliation. Reports will go directly to a new division within compliance, independent, encrypted. And I'll see every one of them. He sat down then finally and looked across the table. Any questions? Silence, then slow nods. One by one, hands reached for pens. By the end of the hour, every signature was on the document. Every barrier had been named, and the cleanup had officially begun. The revolving glass doors of Horizon First headquarters turned slowly, then stopped, with a soft thud. Greg Thorne walked in, first crisp white shirt, navy tie pulled tight. His steps slow like each weighed a ton. Behind him, Haley McClure, hair neatly tied back, clutching a thick brown envelope, nodded to the receptionist, who looked at them without smiling, then picked up the phone and dialed upstairs. No one in the building that day didn't know who they were, and no one in the building wanted them to return. 10 minutes later, they were invited into a small meeting room with frosted glass walls and bright white lights, harsh enough to highlight every flaw. Darius Cole was already there alone. No assistant, no attorney, just him in a simple charcoal gray suit and a leather briefcase resting beside his chair. Greg spoke first. His voice trembled. "Mr. Cole, thank you for agreeing to meet. I know I have no right to ask for anything." He stopped swallowing hard, eyes red. He looked as if even sitting down felt undeserved. But I needed to say this. From my mouth, Darius showed no reaction. No frown, no smirk. He just sat there, hands folded in front of him, waiting. Greg bowed his head, pulling an envelope from his shirt pocket. "I wrote this, not to excuse anything, just to let you know that I'm truly sorry I was wrong. Completely wrong, and I truly didn't know who you were." Haley nodded. "I didn't either," she said, her voice cracking. "There's no excuse for my silence that day. I just want a chance not to keep my job. But to make it right," Darius lifted his eyes from the table. His gaze wasn't cold or angry, just heavy, like it carried decades with it. He nodded slightly. "You're right about one thing," he began. "There are no excuses." Both Greg and Haley held their breath. "But what hurts me most," he continued, his voice low but clear, "isn't that neither of you recognized who I was." He sat straighter. "What hurts me is that if I wasn't Darius Cole, if I were just an ordinary black man with no shares, no title, no power, what would have happened?" Greg shuddered. "Miss Haley, Mr. Greg," Darius said, calling each of them like he was handing them a mirror. "The question isn't whether you treated me poorly because you didn't know who I was. You treated me poorly because you assumed I was no one." Silence, only the soft hum of the ceiling vent filled the air. "We truly regret it," Haley whispered. Eyes reddened. Greg drew in a shaky breath, tears rolling down his face. I'm just asking for one chance, a chance to make it right. I'm not begging for my job. I just want to prove I understand that I'll never let this happen again to anyone." Darius sat still for a long moment. His eyes drifted toward the glass wall, where the late afternoon light started to slope across the street outside. Then he turned back. "If I were a man quick to forgive, maybe I'd nod. Maybe I'd believe that one stumble doesn't define a whole person." He paused. His voice was slow and firm. "But I can't." Greg shut his eyes. "Trust isn't a commodity. It doesn't come with a refund policy. Once it's broken, no matter how often you try to patch it, it's never whole again." Darius stood. "I hope you use this lesson to live differently, to treat people differently." Somewhere else, he walked out of the room. No handshake, no second glance. Haley began to cry. Greg had no more tears left, only silence. They walked out of Horizon First like shadows, not forcibly removed, but knowing full well the door behind them had closed, and it would never open again. The automatic doors of the Horizon First branch in suburban Atlanta slid open with a familiar sound, ding. A light breeze swept through the glass-fronted building, carrying the scent of summer approaching. Darius Cole stepped inside. No suit, no bodyguards, no gold insignia pinned to his collar. Just a man in a simple linen shirt, dark khaki pants and loafers that had weathered more than a few rainy seasons. This had once been one of the worst performing branches on record. Stark disparities in loan approval rates across racial groups, low customer satisfaction scores, and sky-high complaints about staff behavior. 6 months into the reform, he returned. No announcement, no advance notice. Has the promise become practice? At that moment, another man walked in behind Darius, around 50 years old, dark-skinned, with salt and pepper hair. His frayed collar shirt was buttoned carefully. His soft-soled shoes were worn nearly flat. In his hand, he held a bundle of old documents in a crumpled folder. Edges, curled papers slightly bent. Darius stepped aside, standing quietly by the wall as if just another visitor. The receptionist, a white woman in her 30s, immediately stood and stepped forward to the counter. "Good afternoon, sir." She beamed. "Beautiful day today, huh? Please have a seat. I'll get you some cold water." The man hesitated for half a second, the kind of reflex seen in people far too used to indifferent stares, in the curt question. "What do you need?" Thank you," he said softly. The receptionist poured the water, set it on the side table, and handed him a form. "Just fill this out, sir. Someone will meet with you shortly for a private consultation. Here, we treat every customer the same. No exceptions." Her words were gentle but echoed to the wall where Darius stood. He remained still. No interference, no announcement, only observation. Moments later, a staff member stepped out, young male wearing a Horizon First shirt and a name tag that read Marcus, loan officer. He shook the man's hand without hesitation. Please come with me. I've reviewed the documents you sent via email, and I have to say you've prepared everything thoroughly. Really? The man laughed shyly. I thought I'd be told to redo it like the last few places. Marcus shook his head. Not here, sir. Everyone who comes through that door is treated like a valued guest. That's Horizon's new policy, fairness, from the first handshake. The office door closed softly behind them. Darius still stood there, still the man in simple clothes, still the sharp but silent gaze. No one realized he was Darius Cole, who had rewritten the entire internal operations manual. The man who had dared to drag the entire banking system through an earthquake just to make moments like this possible. He smiled. A quiet smile, but deep and genuine, not out of pride, but because what he believed in had finally become real. He turned and strolled toward the exit. As the door opened, the setting sun cast a reflection of the outside billboard onto the clear glass. The Bank of the Future Fair. Honest, transparent. And like a whisper on the breeze, the final words echoed in his mind, soft, steady, and proud. My bank is now a bank for all.
I love this story. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more information. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.